Well, let's talk a little bit about farmers' rights in India, because there have been mass protests in the country. And here to help us kind of break it down is Vijay Prashad. Joining us now is Vijay Prashad, an Indian historian, journalist, commentator, and a Marxist intellectual. He's an executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research and the chief editor of Leftward Books, author of Poorer Nations and Washington Bullets, among other books. Vijay, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Great to be with you. Yeah, sorry.
It's great to have you. No worries at all. All right, well, I'll throw out the first question. There have been mass protests, farmer protests in India. It's been going on for quite some time now. And so what is it that they're specifically protesting? What made them take to the streets?
Well, firstly, it's International it's World Radio Day. And I'm happy to be with you. I know this is not entirely a radio show, but I'm happy to be with you. There's a long-standing dynamic in capitalism that erodes the ability of farmers and agricultural workers to make a living. This is a long history. So let's not forget that history. It's been a very long struggle for farmers and agricultural workers to survive against the entire profit system, not just what's happening in India today. This long-term problem is what provoked in the United States, for instance, the suicides during the farm consolidations, the monopoly control of farms in the 1980s. You might remember the Farm Aid concerts in the United States and so on. This is a very long-term issue that I'd just like to have us put on the table. More closely in terms of India, last year, in the middle of the pandemic, the Indian government, the extreme right government led by Narendra Modi, Prime Minister Modi, pushed through 3 farm bills and 2 labor bills, all basically along the lines of the International Monetary Fund's so-called, rationalization, liberalization policy. In terms of the labor bills, it's called basically there's a kind of labor rationalization that's needed. What they mean is, of course, labor needs to be defeated. These farm bills are very, very much an attack on farmers and on agricultural workers in the following 2 ways, at least. Firstly, they allow big corporate entities to enter and to come in and dominate the marketplace, the mandi, where the small farmers, medium farmers bring their goods to sell. So there is this issue of who controls the mandi. Secondly, the Food Corporation of India, the FCI, which used to have a commanding role in the mandi, in this marketplace, would come in, would buy the product brought to the market by the small farmers, medium farmers, and so on. And by doing this, the Food Corporation of India did 2 simultaneous things. On the one side, it enabled a floor price for the farmers. If there was insufficient demand for the farmers' products, the Food Corporation would buy up whatever they were selling and ensure that there was a minimum support price for them in terms of their incomes. On the other side, Food Corporation would take that that product, whatever they bought, and they would then distribute it through the public distribution system. So there was a floor price for the farmers, and then there was food security provided for people, a way to tackle hunger. This was such a key part of the Indian state's agenda. And last year, the government just slashed with these 3 farm bills, slashed the ability of the state in a social democratic way to come in there, to ensure a minimum support price for farmers, and to ensure that the public distribution system to distribute foodstuffs to the hungry, to the poor, all of that was under threat of being destroyed. And because of that, farmers, who are both people who require the support price, and because of the long-term attack at agriculturalists, they require as well public distribution support to tackle hunger. They basically joined with the workers in the largest strike that's taken place, I think, that we can see in record, which is on 26 November in 2020. 250 million people came out on strike. And that was the day that the farmers' revolt began. And that farmers' revolt started on the 26th of November and continues to this day, including the encirclement of Delhi. And on the 26th of January, which is India's Republic Day, the farmers entered the city in a confrontation with the government, saying, you've got to repeal these bills. Right now, there's a debate in the parliament where the opposition is demanding the repeal of the bills. The government is basically standing firm, refusing to budge, accusing the farmers. This is what the Prime Minister Narendra Modi said. He said he accused the farmers in parliament of being parasites. I mean, it's extraordinary to have the Prime Minister of India use the word parjivi to talk about the farmers, parasites, andolan jivi, as if they give their lives only to revolt, trying to suggest that they're anti-national terrorists and so on. Farmers are not budging, by the way. More and more of them are coming out onto the streets. They are confronting the police. And let's, I'll pause in a minute, but let me say this one thing. The police, the military, these are essentially peasants in a uniform. Their sensibility is with the farmers because these are their family members. And in many of the protest sites, police officers, soldiers have come out and they've said, we stand with our brothers, sisters, parents, and so on. And this has actually really changed the political calculations in the country as you begin to see that there's mass support for the farmers. The government is doing all kinds of dirty tricks, including terrible repression against journalists, including our friends and colleagues at newsclick.in. They faced over 100 hours of detention by the Enforcement Directorate. The government is trying to suppress the story. There is no protest without a journalist, because if nobody reports it, it may not be happening. So they understand that they need to crush the journalists. They went out there. They've arrested Nodeep Kaur, who tried to report the story. They've arrested Mandeep Punia and so on. But the attack on NewsClick is really significant. So, I mean, there it is. That's the farmers' agitation in a nutshell.
So we covered this when it was kind of first breaking on our show, and I found it just so remarkable because India is such a huge country. I mean, it's 1 billion people, and it's just very diverse, huge populations around a huge territory. It seems to me like that would be very, very difficult to organize something on this mass scale, especially with so many impoverished farmers. Like, the sustainability of this, the sort of lasting power. Just how did they do it? Because I'm looking around here in the United States, and I'm like, we're comfortable compared to that, and what are we doing? How did they do it?
No event like this takes place without a process. It just doesn't appear. The very fact that there is a debate about spontaneity, I think, demonstrates that people just haven't had the experience of what it means to build strength. Working class and peasant organizing is about building power and also building confidence of people to come out and protest in public. What capitalism does is it erodes the confidence of people. This confidence issue is fundamental. The idea that you matter, that you as a person matter, that you as a member of a class matter, that your activity can make a difference to change the world. It's confidence that's the antidote to cynicism. It's extremely important. It takes a lot of hard work and boring organizing to build the political platforms, the economic platforms where people in their little struggles gain the confidence for something so big. So in the middle of all this was not a spontaneous action. It's very wrong to see it like that. There were, of course, the communists. There was the All India Kisan Sabha, mass organization of the Communist Party of India, Marxists. There's the All India Agricultural Workers Union, another mass organization. Of course, the communists are in the thick of things, and you can see the red flags everywhere. But it's not just the communists. There are the farmerist organizations. You'll see yellow flags. These are farmerist organizations. They're often organized around, say, region. They're organized around charismatic leadership. and so on. This plays a very important role in these protests. So, for instance, in a certain area, there may be a person who's a pretty charismatic speaker, galvanized people in their area, and then became a bigger leader, started an organization. So that played a role. Now, no protest movement can sustain itself without mass community support. So when the farmers' struggle began, and it's been going on for a decade, when the farmers' struggle began, community groups got involved. This includes religious groups. In the Punjab, for instance, the Sikh community plays a very important role here, the Gurdwara community and so on. Gurdwaras being the religious center of Sikh culture. I mean, what you see is, when the farmers came out, all these organizations, whether the left mass organizations, whether it's the, these charismatic groups and so on, whether it's the religious organizations, social organizations, community organizations, women organizations, everybody came out because it was very clear quickly that this is not just a fight about these farm bills. It's not just a fight about this farmer or that farmer. This is a fight between capitalism and survival. That's what this is. There's a very high consciousness about this. As the police began to crack down on people, the resilience, the resistance to it was very strong. I just want to point out, it takes a lot of work to get here. Things just don't happen. History just doesn't happen. When Marx published the Capital Volume 1, nobody was reviewing that book. Engels, and this is the beauty of friendship. Engels wrote 7 reviews of Marx's Capital. He loved his friend. He went and reviewed it 7 times. In one of those reviews, he wrote that history moves in zigs and zags. History moves in zigs and zags. That's very important. You have an advance, you have a defeat, you have another advance. I think the consciousness of that, the ability to break through cynicism and disappointment, plays a big role. Also to build organizations with small struggles that escalate to bigger struggles. These are very important. What one sees in the Bernie campaign and in the Corbyn movement and so on, those were all around electoral platforms. But they also have to build in communities. You have to build the confidence of people. I mean, this word confidence is very important. What you see now at the protest sites, what you see now in the demonstrations is immense confidence of the working class, of the peasantry, agricultural workers, farmers, and so on. Even the larger farmers have come out to join the demonstration because they see that this is also an existential threat to them, because they are going to have to fight against big monopoly firms that dominate the commodity chain, from the market onwards. Big commodity firms, not necessarily growing things. They don't have their fingers in the soil. And so the farmers, even the relatively big farmers, understand that. And they are right there with this agitation. This is, as I said, an agitation which is about humanity against capitalism. It's nothing more than that. I mean, nothing less than that. It's not a narrow fight. This is a fight that I think we should understand as a front line of a fight to save the planet.
Man, Engels was the ultimate wingman. Best bro.
Definitely.
Just a bro to the bitter end. I love him. Yeah.
7 reviews. It is pretty incredible.
How many reviews have you written of your friends' books?
No, I'm
feeling very guilty now. So thank you for that.
Because you see, my opinion is you'll feel, oh my God, I'm too close to the person, or it's nepotism or whatever. But there's a big difference between nepotism and love. If you love somebody, you should, and you agree with what they're saying, you should write about it. Nepotism means it's mediocre content and you're pushing it up. Don't be nepotistic. But if you love somebody and you believe what they say, go out there. How many reviews have you written of my books?
That's
enough.
No, good.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thanks.
I know.
Damn, on blast. I love it.
Yeah, you can unfriend me now.
I had a question about, Modi's intentions here and his personal interests, because, an estimated 50%, like around half of workers in India work in the agriculture industry. And so these protests have been happening. Clearly, there's the best interests of the IMF involved as well. what's really motivating Modi here? Like, what's in it for him personally?
Right. So this is a good question. And I mean, I'm not prepared to say exactly what's motivating Mr. Modi because I don't know what's motivating Mr. Modi. This is a question best asked directly to Mr. Modi. But, well, we can speculate, we can speculate about what's going on here. Mr. Modi is the kind of extreme right leader who, on the one side, trucks in extraordinary use of toxic ideologies, anti-Muslim ideologies, and so on. That's on the one side. On the other side, he promotes a kind of crony capitalism, which is very clear. He has his own favored capitalists like the Ambanis, the Adanis, and so on. These are family firms. These firms, as it happens, just before the Farm Bill gets pushed through Parliament by a voice vote, these firms basically took stakes in things like silos in the commodity chain or the food chain. So it's interesting. Now, again, I'm not saying anything. I'm just asking you to consider what's going on. It's interesting that the closest political allies that Mr. Modi has amongst India's capitalists, the Ambanis, the Adanis, and so on, before the Farm Bill gets pushed, they start taking an increasing stake in the food commodity chain. The most obvious thing is in the purchase of giant silos, grain silos. Why did they do this just before this bill gets, and then the bill gets rammed through Parliament? Basically, no discussion. I believe, democracy is very important. That if you have a democracy and you have a parliament, and there are 5 opposition members, there's 300 parliamentarians. Even though you have 295 seats in Parliament and you can push any bill through, you must allow those 5 opposition members to speak. They must be allowed to articulate their point of view. That's the basis of democracy. And, as somebody on the left, as a Marxist, I hold very strongly to the idea that you can learn something from your opponents. You must listen to people. You might be surprised by what they're saying. You don't want to have the arrogance to believe that you have some God view, because we don't. The Modi government basically shunned all, of the opposition, pushed through this thing. Now, you've pushed through this thing. Your cronies are benefiting from it. Some point you should have to answer on this, at some point. So I'm not prepared, and I don't want to just say this is what's happening, because I don't know. Maybe it's not. Maybe they are indeed taking their lessons from the IMF, who really believe in labor market reforms and so on. The phraseology of the IMF. Maybe they really believe that cutting subsidies is going to be good for Indian agriculture. Just by the way, what's good for the Western goose and what's supposedly therefore not good for the Eastern gander? The European Union spends about $65 billion every year to subsidize its farmers. The United States has spent trillions of dollars subsidizing its farmers over the past decades. What's okay for the goose here, you can't allow the Indian farmer to get any subsidy. Seems to me even the theoretical argument about free markets and so on is suspicious to me. Somebody is benefiting. Again, I mean, I'm not going to just say, oh, it's Adani, it's Ambani. But I think, don't you feel, if they're buying silos, if they're taking charge of the food chain, and then this kind of reform happens, which will benefit the food chain, well, put it together, put it together.
Sounds suspicious.
Ask Modi the question, right?
Yeah, I don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure that one out.
Such a good point about, other countries subsidizing the agriculture industry. I mean, think about what Trump did when his trade war ended up hurting soybean farmers and other, agricultural workers. He just decided, all right, well, we're just going to take federal money and we're going to go ahead and hand you guys some cash so you can get by. And of course, I mean, I'm very suspicious about where that money actually went. I don't think it went to small farmers. I think it went to big, agriculture companies. But sorry, Nando, did you have a question?
No, yeah. I was just curious because I mean, India is a place that I'm not super familiar with. I've never been to India, and it's a country that seems like a, it's like a whole huge, like it's huge, and I just wanted to ask about the nature of the Indian ruling class and and what it's like what is the Indian ruling class kind of like? How does it behave? I mean, I'm sure it's much like the ruling class everywhere, but what are its particular kind of flavor?
Well, I'm smiling when you're saying that because, look, let's look at the ruling classes. As you say, it's probably not unlike ruling classes elsewhere. Look at the ruling class in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in other places. There is a kind of wretchedness in the ruling class. And I use that word advisedly. There's a wretchedness, there's a way in which it's willing to sell any idea, under the river, under the bridge, if it benefits. Look at when Trump was doing his trade war, so-called trade war against China. Every single Silicon Valley firm understood that they would benefit if there's extra economic pressure on Huawei and ZTE, because those are direct competitors with Silicon Valley. The head of Apple went to see Trump. He didn't complain about the trade war. He said that, your trade war is giving Samsung in South Korea an advantage over Apple. That's what he complained about. They were all for the trade war. I mean, it's a wretched ruling class. They would like to say, well, we don't like Trump because he's, maybe he's sexist, this, that, and the other. But the other side of it, we like it. And we really want it, which is why Biden is essentially going to replicate the so-called trade war against China. There is a wretchedness in the ruling class. Its principles are organized around profit, essentially. And then maybe a few other things sprinkled like the decoration on a cake. But what's baked into the cake, their main principle is the profit motive. And I don't want to sound too rigid in this, but give me evidence to show that there are other things in a principled way that they hold the line on. Even freedom of speech, it's not a principled issue for them. It's, in fact, I don't see the principles operating very much at all, on that. I mean, they were happy that Trump was booted off Twitter. Now, I'm happy for other reasons that he's booted from Twitter, because, boy, I mean, he's an obnoxious character. But, there are principles that should be at least raised by people. At any rate, the Indian ruling class, very much the same. It is basically shaped by its history of being advantaged. Sections of it were advantaged in colonial times, but large parts of it derived their advantage from the Indian state and its protections. In 1944, the Indian ruling class sat down and wrote a plan 3 years before independence called the Bombay Plan. It was drafted by the Tatas, the Birlas, other big capitalists. They wrote in the Bombay Plan, we want protections. We want a subsidy tariff regime to protect the creation of the national economy so that we can blossom and not be squashed by imperialism, the continuation of imperialism after independence. That's the nature of the Bombay Plan. This Bombay Plan continued in its essentials till the 1980s, when in this period, the Indian state used the wealth of the Indian people to incubate the Indian ruling class. When the Indian ruling class felt, well, we are strong enough now to start competing internationally, they collaborated with the IMF in 1991, opened the doors. Who's going to pay the price of this? The farmers. Do you know, from 1991, when India liberalized, meaning opened the gates to foreign funding and to foreign control, 1991 till just yesterday, we have seen about 300,000 farmers in India commit suicide. The suicide rate among farmers is extremely high. This was a story broken by my friend and colleague P. Sainath. This farmers' suicide issue is very significant because it means that there was a lack of organization and confidence among the farmers. In the recent period, during the agitations, the protests in Maharashtra, the long march in Maharashtra from Nasik to Bombay, and then in the farmers' agitation in Rajasthan, in the state just southwest of Delhi, during this farmers' agitation, suicide rate has collapsed. And why is that? Because people's confidence is up, because they feel there is an exit from this crisis. The exit isn't suicide. The exit is mass struggle. I think that's very significant. The ruling class has had to now absorb the fact that the people are fighting, and they are saying, look, you benefit whether the economy goes up and down, you benefit. When the economy goes up and down, we pay the cost. And I think that's where you understand the wretchedness of the ruling class.
Can we expect to see more of these types of uprisings in the region, in the global south?
We're already seeing it. I mean, that's what's really interesting. We're already seeing it. We're seeing healthcare workers on the streets in Kenya. We're seeing young people on the streets in Tunisia. We're seeing mass agitations in Brazil against the Bolsonaro government. We're seeing lots of global agitation. I mean, I could go on and on, list country after country. Even Burma, from where my grandmother comes, Burma has been under a coup government since 1962. This coup that happened recently was just removing the fig leaf that was put out there just a few years ago with Aung San Suu Kyi. It's not a democracy that suddenly the military took power. Military has been there since 1962. In the capital that the Burmese military created in the heartland, thinking this will be safe, in that capital city there have been rolling protests. Administrators have been coming out on the street. They call it the drum revolution. In Thailand, which has had a military government also effectively from the 1960s, hiding behind the monarchy, there have been rolling protests. We're going to see this, guys. We're going to see this deepen. And you know why we're going to see this? Because this pandemic has basically revealed how rotten this system is. It's not that the pandemic has made the system rotten. The system was rotten. The bloody system has been rotten for hundreds of years. This pandemic has just shown its rottenness. Meanwhile, look at China. I mean, what are we talking about? This is a system that has been able to at least mostly break the chain of the infection. And during the pandemic, they've been able to declare an end to absolute poverty. 850 million people raised out of poverty. If you are an agricultural worker in India, you would wish you were born in China.
I hearing you talk about all these kind of uprisings. I mean, I want to ask about, because it's something that we touch a lot on this show, and we always ask our guests, the importance of international solidarity for these kind of movements. I mean, we covered it on this show. Almost as importantly, Rihanna tweeted about the Indian farmer protest. Not as important as this show, but yeah, it's still pretty cool. What is that? What role does that kind of thing play? Does a protesting farmer that's occupying the outskirts of Delhi, how does us kind of thinking about it, caring about it, expressing solidarity help that farmer?
Look, let me ask you a question, Nandu. I mean, Anna, either of you, if you are feeling down, okay, or you're in the middle of something that's emotionally intense, not just down, if you're happy or you're in the middle of something and you've done something, you did a great thing, and it's nice to be told by somebody, listen, I'm texting you, that was great what you did, I'm really impressed by that. Or, I saw you today, you look sad. I mean, when somebody reaches out to you, it always feels good. When you're in the middle of a collective struggle and an important person, Rihanna is an important person. She has a big following. Greta Thunberg, important person. Claudia Webb, a member of the UK Parliament, important person. When they tweet and say, we stand with the farmers, it means something to people, especially when the right wing went nuts. And when these insane groups like the Hindu Sena went on the street and started burning pictures of Greta Thunberg and burning pictures of Rihanna, I mean, when they did that, these people become heroes for the farmers. Look, it's always important to offer your solidarity to people. There are two forms of solidarity. There's material solidarity, where you go and help people. If there is people standing on the line striking somewhere, it's a good idea to bring them a pot of soup and say, I've come to be with you. Here's a pot of soup. Can I contribute to the strike fund? Can I come and spend a few hours? I have a guitar. I'm going to come and sing to you. That's a form of material solidarity. It's so important for movements to have that from people, where the community comes and becomes part of you standing up straight. That's really important. That's what I meant about the gurdwaras coming in, the Sikh religious institutions. You come in and you provide a kind of material support. And then there is the emotional support. It's no less important. When somebody makes a phone call and says, I'm with you, it means a great deal to people. And so, I mean, I'm going to encourage people, take to Twitter, tag at Narendra Modi, tell the Prime Minister of India that you stand with the farmers of India, tag at Narendra Modi, tag Kisan Sabha, the Farmers Association at Kisan Sabha. Tell the agricultural workers you stand with them. It's a great feeling for people to feel that there is the world behind them. It's a terrific feeling.
Is there something? Go ahead.
Just real quickly, hearing you describe the insane Indian right wing makes me realize that much like the ruling class is kind of similar everywhere, the insane right wing is similar everywhere.
I mean, just read some of the comments.
Sorry.
Read some of the comments to Rihanna's tweet. I mean, it's just the pro-Modi propaganda, especially on Twitter, is pretty intense. I mean, I've seen quite a bit of it after critiquing him in some of the videos that we've done at TYT. But, to your point about offering, validation through social media, and also there's material support. Are there any international institutions, international groups that maybe our viewers can look into to offer some material support to these farmers?
I mean, not really. I mean, not immediately. The farmers are doing pretty well. They have massive community support. They don't require that, actually. That's not essential. I think what's really essential is for people who are in press councils around the world. Any journalist should take to social media, write statements in support of newsclick.in. NewsClick, the attack on NewsClick is really part of the attack on the farmers movement. So if you stand with the journalists at NewsClick, I think that's a very important stand. I know that the National Union of Journalists in the UK and other places have put out statements of support. I really hope that journalists will come out, and others, and say we stand with NewsClick, follow NewsClick, really get, that part of it is very important. But also, I think it would be very, very wonderful if farmers associations, I don't know this landscape, but I assume, I'm just guessing now, the Vermont Milk Farmers Association and so on. I'm just guessing if they came out and they said, we support the farmers, we stand with the farmers. In Brazil, the landless workers movement on the 26th of January did a movement where in their encampments, farmers, peasants came in public with candles and say, we light a candle for the Indian farmers. Now, what that does is that sends a message to the farmers' agitation in India, but it also sends a message to the farmers, peasants in Brazil, because they now feel that we have allies in India. And that action, that collective action in Brazil was both for the Indian struggle, but also for the struggle in Brazil. So I highly recommend people take advantage, as it were, of this issue to build their own confidence and strength in their own communities. Go out there and try to have some kind of public display from agriculturalists of various kinds in support of the farmers of India. I mean, in the West, there still are a number of agricultural worker unions. There are cooperatives, there are all kinds of bodies, however big or small they are. I think that activity itself shows that one has developed a global consciousness. So I highly recommend, for journalists and others to support NewsClick, and for any agriculturalist organization to come out there and write statements of support to the farmers. I think this would be very helpful.
Vijay, thank you so much for taking time to explain what's going on. But more importantly, offering words of encouragement and positivity. It's kind of hard to come by these days with all the crises that people are experiencing, for coronavirus to the crisis that capitalism brings forth. So everyone, please support Vijay Prashad's work. Newsclick.in. I got that right, correct?
Yes.
Review his books. Be like Engels. Read them.
7
review
reviews.
them.
You got to do it.
Yeah.
You got to do it. Yeah. Vijay Prashad, thank you again.
Thanks a lot. Take care of yourselves. Bye.
You too.